Hello and welcome to another edition of Lombardi Live, where every Tuesday at 5 I'll be here with interviews and to share special stories with you. You can see recent episodes on our YouTube channel, and you can see all 37 episodes in drumchannel.com Originals, where there are interviews with Dennis Chambers, Virgil Donati, Abe Laborio Jr., Mick Fleetwood, Queen Cora, Charlie Watts, Nick Mason. There's over 400 shows. And if you want to learn how to play drums or just improve your playing, the drumchannel.com Academy is an online resource with legendary instructors and our DC faculty, Thomas Lang, Greg Bissonette, Chad Wackerman, and Terry Bozio. Their proven teaching methods are guaranteed to take your playing to the next level. We've done on Lombardi Live Tony Williams stories, we've done weather report stories, and we have a lot of Buddy Rich stories, probably more than anyone else. They're from the times I had spent with Buddy or other personal friends. This one is from a bandmate, the last piano player in his band, Matt Harris, and it's more than just a Buddy Rich story. It has some rehearsal footage with Buddy yelling at the band. That's very rare, as Buddy never liked anyone around when rehearsing. He actually threw me out once when I was peeking in and he was rehearsing in Las Vegas. It was way before I ever met him. Here's Matt talking about his experiences with Buddy. It's from the Buddy Rich Show, which is an exclusive in the Drum Channel store. I'm here with Matt Harris. And Matt, I can't thank you enough for coming and visiting us here. We're at the Drum Channel studios. You are at Cal State Northridge. What's your official title there?
I'm Director of Jazz Studies.
Buddy Rich you played with for, was it the last year?
It was about 6-7 months.
Of his life?
Yeah, before he passed away, I was the last guy.
Wow. And I know from his daughter that Buddy loved your playing and arranging. And your experience kind of in getting into the band, how did that come about? Were you called by a manager, or just curious how that works?
Well, it's unlike any other job in the world, I think, in that you just get referred by another guy in the band. So I had some friends on the band, and what had happened, it's a tragic story actually. The piano player before me, a guy named Barry Kiner, who was a great piano player. I knew him from, I went to school at Eastman, and he was from that area, Rochester. And this guy was an unbelievable piano player. I mean, incredible, like Oscar Peterson kind of technique and like that sort of thing. But could also turn around and play Rachmaninoff, Chopin, and beautiful classical piano player. The guy was unbelievable. And he arguably was Buddy's favorite piano player ever, because he would kind of was on the band and off the band and would come back on. And so anyway, the tragic story is that he passed away on the bus from a drug overdose, which was just the worst thing as you can imagine. And so there was a vacancy for the piano slot, and a couple of friends, the band was coming through Los Angeles where I was living, and a couple of guys said, hey, you want to do the gig? I'm like, I don't know. I don't think so. And a couple of weeks went by, and I guess apparently he tried a couple other guys, he even had a guitar player for a couple nights, and he hated it. And so they were around LA again and said, come on, my friends were calling me again. It's like, hey, come on, you want to do it? We really need a piano player, and you'd be perfect for it. And of course, I had the infamous tapes and stuff that were going around of Buddy screaming at the band and all that. And I literally sat down with them and put them on and thinking, do I want to do this? I'm like, am I nuts? And at the same time, I was offered this job to go out on the road with Ben Vereen to make about 3 or 4 times the amount of money. And I'm sitting there like, here's a young kid. It's like all of a sudden like, whoa, 2 different gigs, that are both, one prestigious, one a lot of money, not quite as prestigious. And I just figured, you know what, I'm going to do it. I'm going to play with Buddy Rich. I think it'd be great for my career. I didn't even care about my career. It would be a great experience to play with a legendary drummer and also to write music for him. So I got called, and the next thing I knew, I had like plane tickets, and I met the band in Kansas City or something. And I was there a little bit earlier, and the bus showed up, and the guys gave me this book that was like this thick of music. And I'm like, whoa, here we go, And the next thing you know, you're on stage. And his first song always started with a piano trio for 32, maybe 64 bars. And then the band came crashing in. So that was my experience. I mean, all of a sudden, next thing I know, Buddy Rich is counting off the first song, and I'm playing piano with Buddy Rich Band. And I was just blown away. And actually, the thing I guess that we're going to talk about is these figures. I'll never forget to the day I die that first gig of reading the paper and looking at certain figures and hearing the band not play what was written. I'm thinking, whoa, but it was played so convincingly, you couldn't play it any other way. It was so obvious. And so I learned really quickly to memorize the music as best as I could and just stay out of the way of if I didn't know it precisely. If not, I would just look at Buddy and literally follow every single stroke that he'd play. And I survived pretty well on the band, I guess.
Well, he was known for having a busy left hand where he would catch a lot of the figures subtly at the same time. He'd be playing time, with the right hand. So you didn't go through a big rehearsal process of interviewing and
there's no rehearsal. There's just not. I mean, your rehearsal is the first night on the band, and in fact, he went through several bass players when I was in the band. And the whole deal is that you could make a mistake. He would actually, he'd definitely let you know if you made a mistake.
Yeah, I've got a video of a couple of mistakes, and I wanted to get your comments on those.
And he would let you know precisely that you made a mistake. You would know it. You definitely know it by the end of the gig because he would scream and yell at you, whatever. And so, but you'd get the next night. He would call the same tune again the next night, and that was your proving ground. If you made the mistake again, then you were good. You were done. I mean, you might last another week or two on the band, but basically, in his head, you were done. Period.
And that was a conscious effort on his part. He would.
Oh, absolutely. I think.
I have seen him make some. You could ever say Buddy Rich made a mistake, but there's some places where I've observed with some other drummers him doing some fills and some runs around the toms, where it didn't come out quite as clean as he would have liked to it.
Yeah.
And what made it more obvious is that he immediately went back and did it about 5 times in a row. So you knew that he wasn't happy with himself, and it was just like he was just reading himself off as much as he would somebody else to say, what do you mean you didn't get this right? I'm going to get it right this time.
Yeah.
I've got some ideas, and I think it might further emphasize what we're talking about in terms of what's actually written on the chart and the way that could be interpreted by the players, in the band. And I wanted to start out with Love for Sale, which actually is the tune that we have the rehearsal footage of. There's rehearsal footage of several of the tunes, but that's the one I thought that I would go over with you. And how we got that tune into the book. And you're not aware of how that happened? Let's take a little clip here of Louis Belson when he was out here at Drum Channel doing his roundtable show.
Pete Myers, the trombone player, wrote the arrangement. When I heard it, I said, Pete, give me a copy of that, will you? So we started playing it with my band. And then when Buddy got ready to start his own band, he didn't have any in the library. So I said, I'll give you 6 charts. Love for Sale was one, basically the blues. Those 6 arrangements like that. And he played them right off. He recorded them before I did.
Louis said a little later on in the conversation, he said it couldn't have been a better chart for Buddy to do, and he's glad that he did it instead of him doing it for all those years.
If you don't mind me, I got a great story. The other tune he mentioned was basically blues, and it's exactly what you were talking about before. On this one gig in the middle of our tour, who knows where we were, and we played basically blues, and there's this big drum fill, and out of it on beat 2, the band comes roaring in. Well, on this particular night, who knows why, Buddy did something and set up the band and came in on beat 1. He missed a beat. And he was furious at the band. He just looked at us and said, "You guys get on the bus," with a few extra expletives, of course. I want to see you on the bus. And, at intermission, we're like, oh, man. And, of course, one thing, if Buddy, if he got mad and stuff, you just have to let him blow off his steam. You just would never confront him or anything or say that anything was ever his fault, because he would never admit it. And so he comes on the bus, and the lead trumpet player comes on, and Buddy says, "What the heck were you doing on that thing? You came in a beat early." And this the lead player said, "Buddy, you came in a beat early." And we're just like, oh no. And Buddy just flew off the handle. "We'll see who comes in a beat early." And he sat us down and had this whole long lecture and just screamed at us. And then again, the next night, he called the tune, and you knew he was going to do it. And it came to that spot, and he played that kick so hard and so loud, and he just turned around and looked right at the lead trumpet player and goes, wham, and hits that kick so hard, like, "I'll show you who's playing the kick right or wrong." And man, I'll never forget that, ever. It was unbelievable.
Was there any acknowledgement that he was wrong the night before, or no? He still believed that couldn't have happened. Right?
No, it couldn't have happened. But the whole band it was clear. All of us were like, "What happened on that?" Like, "Yeah, Buddy came in a beat early." Don't tell him. And this trumpet player's like, "Oh, Buddy, you came in a beat early." It's like,
Louis had another cute story about Buddy's personality. Let's listen to it for a second.
I was asked one time to describe Buddy Rich, and I said Buddy Rich was the only guy I know who could walk in an empty room and start an argument.
Pretty good.
And he did have people who I know were very close friends that he was, and I think maybe it was more people that were his age, and the band was a lot younger, and I know maybe there was a bit of a father figure thing he had, or just certainly not the best people skills in the world. But as a musician, in terms of what you would have gained out of that experience going into it, because you thought it would be good for you, how did you feel, when you left the band?
To me, it became very obvious when you play with a guy like that. First of all, he's a little nuts, so let's just put that aside.
Right.
But
personality-wise.
Yeah, but he was so into music being right and what he thought right was. So I mean, any given night it could be a little different. It wasn't like right was every single night was the same exact thing. It had a certain level that it definitely needed to be at. But if he decided to pull figures back or do certain things dynamically one night or the next, I mean, you just had to follow him. And he would just be furious if he felt like you weren't putting your best foot forward every single night. So I mean, if nothing else, well, actually, that was one of the main things I think that it taught me. It's just like, when you're playing music and you're on stage and you're playing for other people, you better give it all you've got, And I tell you, again, to be a young kid, I was 23 years old or something like that, and seeing this, 55-year-old guy, 60-year-old guy, just play with way more energy than I could ever muster up in my life. It really it's intimidating in a way, to say the least.
It's amazing, even during these rehearsal tunes that he played. It wasn't like you're just going through the rehearsal to be sure everybody's got the notes in the right place. There was the same amount of intensity in the rehearsals as there was with playing the gig.
Yeah.
And we've heard a lot about things that would happen in the band, and you've given some instances, but I don't know that any have been captured on video to my knowledge. So I just wanted to kind of relive a couple of experiences of the band. This is Bugle Call Rag, and this is actually on one of the pilot television shows that he was doing, which is what I purchased, what we're calling the Buddy Rich Show, that will be a DVD and also a drum channel event. Let's take a look at it. So we simply started the tune again. And this was, the cameras were rolling, it was the middle of the taping. It seemed to me they just couldn't hear him count it off. So it didn't come in quite as clean as it should have.
And that would happen too sometimes, especially because he would usually look at the horn section, which of course the bass player and the piano player were on the other side. So a lot of times we wouldn't hear stuff on live gigs, I know.
On the count off.
On the count offs, yeah. It's like, and you're like, sometimes you literally didn't even know what tune you were playing until you heard the band. It's like, oh, and like I said, that's why you had to learn the music and memorize the music so you could just jump in as quickly as possible.
Did you have most of the charts after the period of time on the band pretty much memorized?
Very quickly. I mean, literally within a week or two. But it's a little easier for me because I was just playing chords. I didn't necessarily have parts. There was a couple tunes that had parts, but
in a band, getting their phrasing together. The Basie Band, of course, is world-renowned, and Harold Jones told a cute story. Actually, we can take a quick look at that now if you want.
Oh, yeah, great.
It has to do with memorizing parts. Let's take a quick look at that.
The first time the Basie Band went to Europe, because of the freight and the excess weight, they didn't even take the band book.
Wow. Really?
Really?
Man,
yeah. So, I mean, that's getting to know your songs,
So can you imagine going overseas and the whole band not taking the charts?
Unbelievable.
When he said that, I said, I think you went further to say that it would have taken all the profit out of the gig. So, what could they leave behind? Well, we don't need the charts, we know. At that point, I guess,
it becomes then really everybody knowing what everybody else is doing ahead of time in order to have it feel exactly the same every night.
Yeah. Duke Ellington's band, I suppose it was like that too.
I'm sure.
Of course, you hear all this stuff that so many of the charts were written by him just like singing parts and stuff to guys, and I think the music was just there as a reference for some of those bands.
And those bands were on the road with a lot of the same personnel for decades. Yeah. So, I mean, what can get a band tighter than playing night after night after night, as it was in those days? And when you earlier mentioned being on the bus, we might also want to describe the bus. It's not a tour bus as the rock groups go out in today, correct?
No.
Was it actually a Greyhound type bus with
seats? Yeah, it was like
and
a passenger seat bus, and each guy had 2 seats, but you're crammed right in, right with other guys and stuff. And Buddy had his little area in the front. It was called the brig. It was like a, pirate ship or something. And he was up in the brig. It was called the brig. And you never went in the front unless you were requested by Buddy.
Really?
And you'd have to go back there to get to your seat to get on the bus. But while you were on the road, you would never ever. You just stood in your seat or sat in your seat. Yeah.
Did he have a motorhome he traveled with on the road sometimes?
I think he did earlier. Yeah, early. I got a real goofy story.
Yeah.
Sorry, stop me if I'm talking too much because I can go all day probably. But I thought it was funny when Buddy had a spot on on the bus, the brig, and you'd think he'd been on the road all his life, and had, like you said, a motorhome and all that stuff. But for some reason he didn't have a microwave on this bus, and so one of the guys in the band finally hooked him up a microwave. And I remember sitting at this restaurant, and he just had it put up, and he was like, "Yeah, I got my new microwave. This will be great." I said, "Yeah, buddy, that's really cool. Think, you can put rolls when they get a little stale. You just put them in, pop them in for 10 seconds, and they get nice and fresh." He says, "What do you mean? If the roll gets stale, I buy a new one." Well, yeah, you can do that too, but you just would not buy anything. I was saying, it's like okay, I could heat up some chicken after, but what do you mean? I just get a new chicken. I get a hot, fresh one. I don't put it in the microwave. Like, all right, whatever,
And play the charts the way I want you to, right?
Yeah.
Speaking of that, when there was an obvious mistake made, I mean, he had big ears. From what I've heard records live where if you really listen very closely, I don't know what, this was back when I used to buy records. I remember there was one when he was playing live where I heard wrong note. And I don't know I couldn't hear what the wrong note was, but he obviously heard something because it was his voice,
right.
Telling somebody that that's what was going on. He would always hear. I mean, he's listening. He knows every note everybody in the band is to play, pretty much.
Oh yeah, especially rhythmically. But yeah, he would hear a clam. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Let's take a look at this. This again is from the actual show performance when he was doing the pilot television program. And listen close and see if you pick up what I did, where this trumpet player comes in a beat early on a figure. First, I heard the audio of it, which led me to it. So when I looked at the video, Buddy's look at the trumpet player led me to believe, well, I'll get your reaction. Listen to it. Okay, let's listen to that one more time. Did you hear it out there? It's where the figure goes, that's dead up, and somebody comes in and does dead up, and then the rest of the trumpets come in and dead up. Let's listen to it one more time. You heard it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
And his look is worth a million words because he's looking forward. When it happens, he turns around and looks, and then looks back. As a player of the band, what do you think at that moment?
You think your gig's over is what you think. And it very well might be. Again, if this happened, on this tape, and he'd either do it another take or the next night, I mean, I'm telling you, he'd play it again. And if it did happen again, that would be it.
The possible saving grace here was that it wasn't on a Buddy chart. This was when they were doing the pilot for the television show.
Right.
So obviously they had Lionel Hampton on as a guest.
Right.
And it was one of Lionel's tunes that they had never played before until this day. So maybe there was a little room for for mercy there.
A little.
So, and would it actually go that fast? You would have maybe two or three opportunities, and if you weren't up, because I guess in his mind that just meant you weren't up to snuff. If there was going to be continuous problems with you just keeping up.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I know, and you know Alan Kaplan.
Yeah.
He was a good friend, and we were actually sharing a house together at the time he got his call to go on Buddy's band. To find out at 11 in the morning how excited he was to fly to Vegas. This is just before they were going to Europe the first time, and it was kind of the joke. People were flying back and forth almost every day. He was coming up with people for the band. So he was quite excited in the morning, only to find out in the afternoon he was replacing the trombone player who had got leave of absence in the middle of the second set or something like that. The story was the night before, right? But he played with the band for a long time. So, as I'm sure you would have also had Buddy not passed away. But, there was always new faces in the band, I gather.
Yeah.
Pretty much. So that led me to another question, because Love for Sale is the tune we're going to examine here for a second. And I didn't know why he'd be rehearsing it, other than that there probably were some new players in the band, because the chart had been up in the book for quite some time. And this gets into kind of the idea of phrasing. And when you have a band and as you're directing it, as we spoke of earlier, the way you would ask the band to phrase a figure, kind of the way Buddy asked the band to phrase a figure, and see what you think about it.
Okay.
First, let's listen to it earlier on in the tune, where he obviously plays rim shots on the snare drum to emphasize the way he wants the figure played. Let's take a look at it. So a situation like that, bump, bump, ba-da-da, I mean, he was playing all rim shots on the snare drum.
Yeah.
There was no question that's the way he wanted the band to phrase the figure. Did he do that often when you were on gigs? Overly accent a pattern, or did you ever rehearse?
We never rehearsed.
Really?
Never, ever. Well, the only exception would be if you had a new piece of music, and since I was a writer, I had to go through that with him a couple times. But even that, I mean, what he would do, he'd sit out in front of the band would play it once without a drummer, and then he'd come back on, and he would have a good portion of it down. Yet there was actually a time I wrote this chart, it was called Harco's Shuffle. I won't go into what the title means. And he was mad at us, I think, and he said, "Can we, this was on stage in front of an audience." He says, "You got that new chart?" Like, "Yeah, we got it. I got it." He says, "Well, can we read it?" And I'm like thinking, well, we can read it, you can't, but... I passed it out in front of an audience, passed out this chart, I said, "Yeah, guys, kind of gave directions what was going on," and he counted off, and we played it the first time in front of an audience.
He'd never heard it before.
Never heard it. And I wrote it in a way that most of the figures were fairly predictable, but still, he caught a lot of it, and by the second night, he, probably had 90% of it.
I've heard stories of him having virtually a photographic memory.
Yeah.
In life in general, which would obviously apply to hearing a tune one time and then being able to play through it. Mm-hmm. I had an experience when I had to be about 20, because the band was in Vegas for the first time, and he was rehearsing in the big showroom, and I snuck in. I was across the street, so I knew that he was rehearsing, playing across the street. I knew what his rehearsal schedule was, so I snuck in and sat. There was nobody in this huge showroom except me and a friend sitting in the back. And the big lesson for me was that he stopped the band. They were playing a tune. Actually, it was the drummer who was with the singer that came on before him was playing the chart, just so a drummer would be there to play the chart with the band.
Right.
He stopped the band, he went up and he put his hand on the snare drum to muffle it and played the figure with rim shots with his right hand. Similar to what we heard him just do now while the band was playing. But it was just like, this is the way I want it played. I want it played exactly like that. Just how absolutely down to not even phrasing where it would be kind of airy. It's just like where every one of these rim shots is exactly the way I want the figure. Yeah. And I believe the following comment was, "If you don't get it like that, I'm going to have a whole new trumpet section in here tomorrow night," to almost quote him.
But that exactly, you're right though. That's how he'd quote rehearse, would be on the gig, and you're right. You'd have to follow precisely what he'd do. But I remember because very specifically with quarter note triplets, that some nights he'd pull it back, and if he was mad at the band, he'd do it on purpose, pull it back to the point that it was like dropping a beat or something, but he wanted to make sure that everyone was following him,
listening,
no matter what. Yeah, and you better be following him. And so, but no, he would do that a lot of time with you're right, with the snare drum, he'd pop off these figures, and it's like, well, it's clear as a bell that this is exactly what it is, you know, period.
Here's the figure in Love for Sale, where he stops the band. Let's listen to it.
What did you say? Slow down. I'm not going to say it again. Then better stay on top. I'm not going to tell you again. Right with me. That's good. Hold on. 3. Sharp. Right this time. No more.
So at home, you can play this back and forth as many times as you want. It's really interesting to me to hear the difference between the way they played it the first time. There is a subtle but a difference. Could you explain it a little bit? What you thought maybe he was going for that they weren't doing?
What I think it is, and I'm looking at a lead trumpet part here at the figure, is that the figure, and it doesn't have it on the music, tends to have an accent on 2 and 4. Da 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 da. And so when you tend to do that, especially as a horn section, you tend to pull it back a little bit, or it gets a little weighty.
I believe his opening comment, which is hard to hear, because I hear the words "slow down." I believe he's saying "don't slow down," and that would maybe
I'm almost sure that's what it was, and it sounds like that's what the correction was, and it's extremely subtle. So he wants that a little bit of the accent on 2 and 4, but don't let it drag the time back. It sounds like that was what he was trying to articulate.
It's interesting how, and that was the story of your life, I imagine, for the time you were with the band, in terms of getting everything just that precise.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
When you're directing the band, or as young players are with bands, I think a point I wanted to make that the notes that are on the paper, same with classical music, are in a way a reference to what the music is, and it's the feeling that you put into it, which the intensity that he played with, in the way you can hear the various different switches on. We have a show and a DVD that's called Buddy Rich Up Close, in the way you can hear the different switches where we have the different audio tracks. You hear the drums hot, you hear just the bass drum hot. It's kind of eerie just to hear how he phrases that bass drum. And that lets you know exactly where he wants that, the kick to be with the band. But in terms of the way that you interpret that music, at a college level, do you get into as much as you would with a professional studio band in terms of the nuances and what Buddy was trying to impart onto that young band?
With a college band, yeah, you have to give a lot more direction. A lot of times they don't have the experience and knowledge that a professional player would have as far as the history of certain songs and the arrangements. Like, this is a classic arrangement. There's really one way to play it, and it's Buddy Rich's way. So when you play this song, it's not like you're just playing an arrangement of Love for Sale. No, you're playing Pete Meyer's arrangement of Love for Sale, which was done by the Buddy Rich Band. So in my opinion, certain charts have to be played that way. Neil Hefti's Little Darling's another one. There's one way to do it. That's the way to do it. Some of the Ellington stuff, there's just one way to do it.
Exactly. And I think that's part of the legacy of what he's, left behind. If you take the chops away, take the technique away, the intensity that he played the band with, stood on its own, even without all the blistering left hand and solos. And I think that's an important part of what I wanted to bring up in this conversation. And I can't thank you enough for joining us here and looking through some of these and sharing with us some of the stories that you had with the band. And as time goes by, we'll get you out to Drum Channel maybe and tell some more stories with some other guys, especially as we get into the classes with the younger students. I think it's important for them to hear about, and I know you're so much into education that you're really into that. You also joined us with Jimmy Cobb out here, playing with him at Drum Channel, and Joe Morello. So on drumchannel.com, you can see Matt on several of our shows. You're the resident piano player, I think, here. Yeah, right. Thank you so much for coming by today, Matt. I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I think one of the main points of this interview is that when Buddy would show his frustration, it was only because he wanted 110% every night out of every member of the band. While yelling at someone might not be the best way to achieve that, well, that's Buddy. I want to thank you for watching, and I want to remind you, we have 3 great downloads: Buddy Rich Show, the Buddy Rich Up Close, and Buddy Rich Memorial Concert. If you're a Buddy Rich fan, they are a must for your library. And in case you haven't seen this, I'm going to close now, but I'm going to play for you Mike Clark, channeling Buddy from Beyond. If you haven't seen it before, check it out, and I'll see you next Tuesday at 5.
You see, there's an inner Buddy Rich that lives inside of me somewhere. How was that, buddy? Was that cool? Was that close?
How dare you play like that for me?
What?
You can't plant your fucking foot and play. You're all over the fucking place.
What?
When you get back to New York, you'll need another fucking job. Count on it.
He's bugged. All right. Never mind.